So I spent a lot of time as a kid at my grandparents' house. Anybody with me in that? Did they ever spend a lot of time? Both of my parents worked, and Grandma and Grandpa were probably the best babysitting available, right? The daycare, kind of a situation. And so about the first 3 years of my life, I was over there pretty regularly, just hanging out with them. I learned how to play Monopoly with the best of them. And so much so I learned how to cheat really well too. And my grandma caught on after a while. That was a problem. But they would always be there. And I would put myself about 4 or 5 years old on this particular day that I went over to Grandma's house. And I didn't want to be at Grandma or Grandpa's house. All right? And I didn't want to stay there. I was upset the whole car ride there. I walked in the house with my little pouty face on, right? And when my mom went to leave, I wanted to leave with her. And I didn't want to stay. And so I did what any logical 4 or 5-year-old child would do. I threw myself face down on the floor, began to bang my hands and feet on the ground, and say, I don't want to stay here, and I don't like either one of you. And my grandma still tells me about that to this day. But moms, you probably know best the will of a child. It's an interesting thing, isn't it? Yeah, it is. So much so that we've created this term strong-willed child. We've had those out there before, yeah? And there's books that have been written about them, all that kind of stuff. But it's so interesting to watch kids and their behavior and how they see the world and the innocence that's there and what they really, really, really care about. I think that's pretty interesting to look at that. But I think that's a reason to celebrate Mother's Day, isn't it? Because of some of the things that we have to put up with, that you guys would have to deal with. And I know I gave my mom fair share of issues. She's not in the room right now, so I can say anything I want. No, I'm kidding. But here she comes. That's how it usually worked as a kid. Eyes in the back of the head. I remember one time, I still feel shame about this one, just to get another smile on your face. She went grocery shopping, and she brought me back a toy from the store. And it was a little motorcycle. Do you remember this? Little motorcycle that you gave me. And I was in a bad mood that day. Apparently I needed something to eat or I needed more sleep. I don't know what it was, but she gave me this toy motorcycle. I didn't ask for it. I didn't ask her to bring me anything back. She did it out of the goodness of her heart. And I looked at it and I went, what does it do? And she's like, it's a motorcycle. And I'm like, it doesn't do anything. And I don't remember the conversation after that, but I remember just being so angry at her, like, why did you get me this cheap piece of junk, And like to this day, I still feel like bad that I acted like that. So I'm sorry, Mom. But I remember that, and that's a terrible thing. But how many of us have given our moms that junk before? And so the thing is I remember I've heard a couple of mothers say this, that I would just love a day where you guys didn't fight, where I didn't have to cook and I didn't have to clean and I didn't have to, all that kind of stuff. So somebody went, fine, we'll give you that day. And they made Mother's Day, right? And so hopefully you guys don't have to cook, you don't have to clean, and any kids at home don't end up fighting, and you don't end up fighting with your spouse either on this day. But it's definitely a day to appreciate, a day to remember, to reflect, to celebrate people in our lives that have dealt with a lot of trouble for the sake of love. Like, what is it that drives mothers to do these things? Like, where does that strength come from? The will of a mother is something of heroic status, isn't it? In a lot of cases, it is unique. It is something that is quite different from the will of other things that happen. When the motherly instinct kicks in, watch out, right? Mama bear is going to protect her cubs at all costs. A little over a year ago, Kim tripped on her downstairs steps, and there isn't a railing that goes all the way down the bottom 3 steps. She slipped, and she fell off of those 3 steps and landed on like the back side of her, like right in the kidney, like just boom, and like she was in instant pain. And I heard it, and I think I was down in the other room in the basement, and I ran around. I'm like, "Are you okay?" And she's like, "I'm gonna be sick." And I'm like, like. So I ran. I grabbed a trash can, put it next to her, and I said, "I'll be right back." And I ran because I can't handle it when other people are getting sick. unless I get sick too, right? And so I pulled out of the room, and I'm like peeking around the corner. I'm like, you okay yet? She's like, I think so. And so I like kind of ran past her, not looking at her, went up and got a washcloth to put on her forehead to cool her down and take care of all this kind of stuff. I was trying to take care of my wife, but at the same time, I couldn't control my own body. I didn't have enough willpower to control my own reflexes, right? Anybody ever experienced that before? Yeah. So I feel, at one hand, I feel incredible shame about the fact that I couldn't just like be there and hold her hair and be like, it's going to be okay, honey. But on the other hand, I'm like, we just go back and forth probably. You know what I mean? We don't want to do this whole thing. So we deal with this. And so, moms, you're amazing human beings, because it doesn't matter if it's blood, if it's vomit, if it's slime. It doesn't really matter what it is, right? I'm not trying to be disgusting. I'm just trying to make a point that you guys deal with that junk, right? Because you have to. Because I think of nothing else other than love, right? I'm not a mom, so you got to kind of give me some feedback on that. Yeah. There is an incredible willpower that when it's your child, something comes over you and it's like, here I go. I'm going to take care of this. It doesn't matter if the house is on fire. It doesn't matter if a tornado is coming. It doesn't matter if the bridge is collapsing. If your kid is in there, you're going for it. And you turn into superheroes. And I just think that you deserve a lot of credit for that. But there's something inside that comes out when that happens. Like, you don't have to think about it. It's just a part of you. And there's records of women lifting very heavy objects when someone that they truly care about, namely their kids, are trapped. And all of a sudden, the body turns into this superhuman thing, and the will of a mother is able to rescue those children and to do those kinds of things. And it's an amazing thing that God has built into you to be able to do that. And I think, like I said, I think it's worth celebrating. But you can call it determination, you can call it fortitude, you can call it whatever you want. I believe it's one thing. I believe it's an act of the will. I believe that it's willpower. And willpower is a mysterious thing. The American Psychological Association, they conduct an annual survey, Stress in America survey is what they call it, where respondents clearly cite a lack of willpower as the number one reason for not following through with healthy lifestyle changes. Would your experiences back that up? Yeah, lack of willpower is the number one reason for not making healthy changes to a lifestyle. And most psychological scientists, they are going to define willpower in terms of self-control, being able to delay what you want in the short term in order to achieve long-term goals. How many of you have ever tried to do that before? That's going to be most common in the area of food, right? Yeah, that's going to be most common there, but there's going to be other things like for work, getting small projects done and being diligent in that. For me, I struggle reading consistently. Like I'll get down and I'll have like something come up and I'll read an entire book like all in one setting. But then to actually like consistently be developing myself and learning and reading and always continue doing that, like it's a hard discipline for me to develop in that. Think about this, think about prayer. We just got done talking a series on prayer earlier this year, and that is a long-term, everyday discipline in order to achieve a long-term goal, is it not? In order to grow deeper and to know the Lord more. And we find trouble in doing some of these things, and some of us, if not all of us, would cite, I have a lack of willpower. I can't will myself to do that, is what we would probably say. They also continue to define it as you might be told that you have strong willpower if you can override unwanted thoughts, feelings, or impulses. So if you're level-headed, you might be called that you have strong willpower. If you can arrest thoughts and take them captive, that might be a reason for willpower. People that have a level head keep their emotions in check. They'd be considered to have strong willpower. Regulation of the self, but the self is evidence of willpower according to these scientists. So being able to say no to your body's desires is what that would be. Regulation of the self. And up until this point, it sounds good. It kind of sounds like we've been talking about, right? If you've been with us for the last few weeks, we've been talking about holiness and being holy, and God says that be holy for I am holy, and we've gone through all this. It sounds like a good thing, but it sounds like we need to kind of exercise our willpower muscles a little bit, right? Wouldn't you agree? I think that's something that we'd all be better off if we had more willpower, right? Would you agree with that? Okay. So, until you get to this last point, they state this: willpower is a limited resource capable of being depleted. Now, I will say the science is not conclusive. There's actually a major shift going on right now in this, in the research in this. Some of the initial thoughts are not what they thought, and so they're researching this, they're testing all of these things. But for now, what they say is that willpower is a limited resource. And I would say that according to my experiences, I would agree with that. Would you agree with that? Yeah, I think so. So we just take our experiences. You walk past a plate of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies. And at first you can be like, yeah, no, I'm good. I don't need a cookie. You walk past it again and it just kind of wafts into your nose. And all of a sudden you begin to think about eating a soft, gooey, warm chocolate chip cookie in your mouth. And then you go like, I do have a cold glass of milk in the fridge right now. And you begin to kind of think about this, and the smell just continues to remind you, right? And all of a sudden, before too long, even though you said no initially, you're kind of being worn down simply by the smell of a cookie. And you eat one, right? And then you eat two. Then four, right? And all of a sudden, your willpower is completely depleted. You don't know what you're doing, and you're like, I can't believe I ate that whole plate of cookies, right? And it's all over. Now, that's a silly example, but let's apply that to something else in life, right? Let's think about that in serving one another in love. Like let's not even talk marriage. Let's just talk friendships. Somebody asks you for something, and then they ask you for something again, and then they ask you for something again, and it gets more and more difficult to continue serving someone who is what we would maybe label as needy. It becomes difficult to continue helping them because it feels like they're draining you dry, and your willpower to continue working with them begins to deplete, right? I don't think willpower is just a negative resistance thing. I think willpower is the will to do something that we need to do. And so here's what I would like to make you think about today. Is your pursuit of God based on your own willpower, or is it based on something else? Because here's the thing, we've talked about self-control. We've talked about training in holiness, that there's an absolute reason that we would what the Apostle Paul would say, that he would beat his body into submission so that it wouldn't cause him to fall into wickedness. Like, there is an absolute responsibility on the shoulders of Christians in order to control themselves and to be self-disciplined and to be controlled. But what if you just don't flat out want to? What if you just don't want to? Like, I like the idea of Jesus. I like the idea of church. I even agree with the morals of what Christians say and even some practice. But I don't want to. Like, you like the idea of being holy. But you just don't feel like it. Not much is going to change you, right? If you don't have the motivation, the move, nothing's going to move you forward. What if today you want to? What if I say something today, it sparks a fire inside of you? You're like, yeah, I'm going to live holy. I'm going to try and do some of these things. But someday down the road, something down the road might knock you off the horse and you fall into a spiritually depressed state. And you don't have the willpower to keep going again. What then? Like, I think our experiences have proven that we just don't wake up one day and go, yep, I'm going to have lots of willpower today. Right? I go to bed sometimes at night being like, I'm going to get up at 5:30. Ken's going to call me at 5:30 to get me up out of bed. And I'm going to get up. I'm going to spring out of bed just all excited and wide-eyed, and we're going to be ready to go. I'm going to get my workout in. I'm going to go study the Bible for an hour and pray. And then I'm going to go to work, and I'm going to get all these things done. Never works out like that, does it? The alarm goes off in the morning, you're like, no, snooze. Ken calls my phone, and I let it go to voicemail. Wake up at 7 o'clock, and I listen to my voicemail, and it's going beep, beep, beep. He did that to me this week. He's a good friend. He is a good friend for doing that because he cares about me. And that's not sarcastic. That's actually true. But it doesn't work like that, does it? You set goals. I'm going to do this by September of next year. And there's things that just kind of get in the way, and it's just so tough to do that. It seems impossible to live up to the standard of holiness that God has given to us. And on our own, it is. I just be flat out honest, it is going to be on your own. Normally, when up against the impossible feat, we would back down and spend our efforts elsewhere, wouldn't we? I do not like playing games that I'm not good at. I do not like doing projects that I'm not good at, right? Lately, in the project of the office, we've remodeled the office a little bit to give us some more space and allow for some classrooms and different things. And I did not fail wood shop, but nothing I made in wood shop came out right. Right? And so I've been cutting trim and putting trim on and doing all this other stuff. And you're going to come in there and you're going to go, you do this? I'll be like, yep, I sure did. It's crooked. I know. All right? And it's just going to be the way it is, right? I don't enjoy that kind of a thing. I enjoy using power tools and feeling like I know what I'm doing, but I don't enjoy that kind of thing. And so when we're up against an impossible feat, like we are in Christianity, a lot of times we want to back down and we want to feel successful in things. So what we do is we roll the true gospel off of our back and we pick up something that is no gospel at all, is what ends up happening. I want to do good things. I want to feel good about myself, helping other people. I want to feel like I did worship today. I want to feel like I've accomplished something in this path. And so what we do is we sacrifice the righteousness of Christ in order to put on something that is so incredibly different. In Galatians, we would find out that it's no gospel at all. Here's the key. And we talked about this last week. Holiness is unattainable through our own efforts, through our own willpower. Isaiah would tell us that our efforts to close the gap created by sin, they're nothing. They're about as useful as filthy rags. There's no way we're going to be what God has asked us to be in this body. And so the question becomes this: why try? Why exert the willpower? Why exert the effort? Why try to do these things in order to try and attain something that's unattainable for our God? And our willpower is decimated by that word impossible, isn't it? If somebody tells you that's impossible, and you know it's impossible, you're not going to go, right? For some of us, if we think it's possible, that word impossible drives us even further, doesn't it? You can't do that. Oh, let me show you. Yeah. Right? Yeah, absolutely. But if you know it's impossible, it just kind of cuts it out. It sterilizes our efforts. So this is the character of the God we serve. This is what he did. He looked down on us in the moment that we were the most rebellious, when we were the most indulgent of our own desires, when we were screaming and shaking our fists at him, when we were in the corner hopeless, crying alone, when we were trying to be macho men, relying on every ounce of our own strength to find meaning, purpose, legacy, and power. He saw us, and he saw how incredibly helpless we were. And out of the great love that he had, he declared you worthy of his attention, of his love, of his work, and of his sacrifice. And so by doing only what God can do, Romans 8:3 talks about this, by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and for sin, he condemned the sin in the flesh, in order that the righteous requirement of the law might be fulfilled in us, who walk not according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. What that scripture says is that God did the impossible for us. He fulfilled the righteous requirement of the law. And then in Philippians chapter 2, he says, but Jesus emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God has highly exalted him and bestowed upon him the name that is above every name. And so what we see is that Jesus lowered himself. He humbled himself and was obedient to the very day that he died, even though he had at his fingertips the entire majesty of what God has in all of creation. He laid that down in order to become one of us. And even facing a brutal execution, his actions never violated God's law. And it's through the lens of his innocence, his sacrifice, that you and I are now seeing. I have yellow computer glasses that I wear because I look at a screen quite often. And it begins to hurt my eyes and give me headaches after a while because there's a certain blue light that comes through that computer screen. And those yellow glasses, they filter out that blue light and it protects my eyes in a way. It's the same concept with what God is looking. He's looking through the lens of Jesus Christ at us, and he no longer sees, if you're in him, he no longer sees the wickedness that lives in our flesh. What he sees is us for who he created us to be. It filters out the wickedness. It filters out some of those things. And so Christ is now a mediator, closing the gap between us and God. And so when God says, "Be holy because I am holy," it's no longer impossible. It's no longer a checklist. Of course, our obedience to God's law, it demonstrates our devotion to him, doesn't it? If we do what he says, it would be an evidence that we are devoted to our God, right? But it's even more. Our obedience is even more a statement of our desire for him as a result of his demonstration of love for us. And so, as a kid, there were certain requests that my parents made of me I didn't want to do. Clean your room. Nope. Right? I don't want to. I don't want to. But for two things that would come about, one is the love that I would have for my parents, and also the fear out of love that I would have for my parents in the event that I disobeyed what they would have me do, right? So one is the side that I don't want to offend them by just being completely defiant. The other side of that is I don't want to face the wrath out of love in order to be disciplined to do what is right. Right? We face the same thing with our God. Yes, you can do the things that God has asked you to out of obedience and out of just strict obedience, but there should be some level of desire that backs that up. And so salvation comes by way of trusting in this, that not only did Jesus come to be a sacrifice for our sins, but he came to give us righteousness apart from the law. This is the gospel. And I want you to hear me very clearly. This is the good news, that God did something for you that pained him, that he suffered for, that he willed to happen in order that sin could be defeated. And his just nature upheld, and given you the freedom from the very chains that you've put on your wrists yourself. Understanding that Jesus has not only taken away your sin, but that he's also given you a righteousness apart from doing something. That is the gospel. That is the beginning of salvation by grace through faith. And so having this example, the Apostle Paul will push us in this direction. Philippians 2, verse 12 says, therefore. So in other words, because we have this Jesus who was obedient. We just read the scripture that was therefore. He was righteous, and this has been given to us. It says, therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Now, I want to talk about this quickly. What does it mean that you must work out your salvation? Working out your salvation. The Bible is clear is that good people don't get into heaven. All right, I'm just going to make that statement. That's provocative, I know, because everybody thinks that because we've done good things, we're going to heaven. Good people don't get to heaven. Those who believe in Jesus Christ, His power to remove sin and to give them righteousness, those who have taken hold of that salvation, they are the ones who inherit eternal life. And so Ephesians 2, 8 through 9 would back this up. For by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing. It is in fact the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. And so Paul is saying, as a result of Jesus Christ, as a result of His righteousness given to you, work it out in your everyday life. Like, how is that going to change you? How is this going to change your drive in life? How is this going to change the way that you dress in life? How is this going to change the words that come out of your mouth? How is this going to glorify God in your life? How is this going to work itself out in you? And he's saying that there should be this attitude of fear and trembling, not terror. Not, oh, I'm on the new roller coaster at Cedar Point and I'm going to die. Not that kind of a terror, right? Wholesome caution is a way that someone put it. Fear and trembling as in wholesome caution. It's an idea that you don't trust yourself because you know that your emotions, your logic, your will has all been affected by sin and is now corrupt. The wool has been pulled over your eyes, and there are days that you just can't see the whole picture, right? He likens this to obedience and humility. As Christ was obedient and humble to the very end of His life, no matter how terrible it got. Paul says, continue in this as long as you have been doing, implying that it is an ongoing process. Like, you're not just going to wake up one day and be like, I'm perfect. If you do, I hope somebody's there to smack you, all right? Right? Don't you feel the same way? Like, please pinch me if I ever get up here and say, yeah, I figured it all out. Follow me. No, that's not the way it works. Right? I don't want Ken to slap me. Oh, man. Okay. Oh, man, that's even better. But that every day, here's what this means, is that every day you're going to have to will the decision to follow Christ's example of humility and obedience. And he isn't shy about using the word work, and nobody likes that word. I'm sorry. I don't like that word. But it's true, it's work, it's training, it's discipline, it's an exertion of the will to keep persevering in this task. And that work happens no matter if you're in the morning getting ready for your job. It doesn't matter if you're at your job. It doesn't matter if you came home and sat in your recliner after your job. It doesn't matter if your head is on your pillow at night. There is an exertion to do the will of God and to obey God. The identity of Christ doesn't come off when you're done with your job for the day, when you come home for church for the day. This is who you are. He says that despite our experience, that our will eventually gives out and we grow weary. It's despite our experiences. He says, pursue this, do this, keep going in this. And that is heavy. Like, if we let that scripture kind of sit in our minds and we begin to kind of mull it over, chew on it a little bit, understand what that actually implies, like, that becomes a burden on the shoulders, that there is this thing to believe in Jesus. We must do these things. In order to believe in Jesus, it's got to work its way out, and I've got a lot of things ahead of me that I've got to change, that I've got to work on, that I've got to do. And so what Paul does is in verse 13, he encourages us with this. He says, "For it is God who works in you both to will and to work for His good pleasure." This is why we sing the song From the Inside Out. Because what we're working out, what we are doing on the outside, what this righteousness is affecting in our lives is sourced. The will to go on, the power to do it, the strength and the alertness and all of this stuff is sourced from what God is working within. Let me just read the second verse of this song. It goes into the bridge. It says, your will above all else, my purpose remains. The art of losing myself in bringing you praise. Everlasting, your light will shine when all else fades. Never ending, your glory goes beyond all fame. In my heart and my soul, I give you control. Consume me from the inside out. Lord, let justice and praise become my embrace to love you from the inside out. We're working out what God is working within. And we have the power to work out our salvation, to be diligent in this because God is working within us, giving us a desire to keep going, driving our wills forward with this energy that comes not from our flesh, but from the source of all and eternal life. This is why good deeds fail in the pursuit of attaining heaven. This is why our efforts are not enough to please God. This is why simply good people can't get there. It's because eventually the human mind, the will, the efforts to move forward die off because they are weakened by our decision to sin. They are weakened by the flesh. But there is something about the power of the Holy Spirit that keeps Christians going even into the point of torturous death. You see, it's the power of God that allows us to see the evil going around us, to be tempted by it, but allows us to stand firm even in the middle of it. But please understand that while it seems to be a conflict of thought, we still have to work it out. Matthew 12, 9 through 13 is a cool story of a man who didn't have the use of his hand. It says, he went on there from there and entered the synagogue. We're talking about Jesus here. And the man was there with a withered hand. I'm going to skip to verse 13. And it says, then he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And the man stretched it out, and it was restored, healthy like the other. Wouldn't that be cool to just walk around and be like, I see you're ill. Stretch out your hand. There you go. I mean, I can't imagine like Jesus was like, yeah, I'm pretty awesome. I don't know. He would just be like, stretch out your hand. I'll talk to you later, man. I mean, there's a complete humility about it. There was a complete like compassion about it. You might have hugged him afterward, but it was not like it wasn't like a show like sometimes we see street performers do. In John 5, there was a man who hadn't been able to walk for 38 years. 38 years, he wasn't able to walk. And Jesus walked up to him and asked him, do you want to be healed? The man didn't answer the question. Instead, he talked about how no one had helped him do what he needed to have done. And then Jesus said, get up, take up your bed, and walk. And what the scripture says is that at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed, and he walked. It'd just be so cool. I want to ask the question, what if these men had said, that's physically impossible for me to do, Jesus, you're crazy, and they hadn't followed through with the action? What would have happened? I don't know that they would have been healed. We don't have a definite biblical answer for that, but it would seem that every miraculous healing in there, the person who was healed obeyed. It would seem that way. God told both of these guys to do something they could not do on their own strength. He gave them the power, listen, He gave them the power required to fulfill His request. But they still had to do it. I am confident that if the man had stayed on his bed, or if the other man had left his hand at his side, neither one of them would have been healed because there was no demonstration of faith or belief in Jesus. What I want you to hear today is that the righteousness of Christ has fulfilled the righteous requirement of the law. He's given those of you who've heard and believed the gospel message a spiritual healing. And as a result, you have the opportunity to access a power that fuels the will of the human spirit to carry out the purpose that God has given to you. But the question is this: have you shifted from your will to His will? Have you shifted from your power to Spirit power? Have you shifted from your own logic to His logic? Have you shifted over from your way of doing life to His way of doing life? LivingByFaithBlog.com had a great summary of how we might be able to evaluate ourselves to see if we're living according to our own will. And here's this author's clues. He said, obeying just because I'm supposed to is a clue that I am operating on my own willpower. Just doing something because I know I'm supposed to do it. Obeying just because others expect me to. That's me operating on my own willpower. Obeying without a promise motivating me. That's a spiritual or a truth promise, a promise that comes by way of the Scriptures. And the fourth thing, he said, obeying without asking the Spirit to change my heart. Those four things, he did that. Now, this kind of obedience, in our journey, in our spiritual journey, I'm going to make this statement, that sometimes willpower obedience is required. You all might have heard the joke before that wife comes in to her husband and says, honey, you need to get up. It's time to go to church. And he said, I don't want to go to church today. Let's just sleep in. And he said, but honey, if you don't get up and get ready and go to church, who's going to preach? Right? Been there. Today felt kind of like a lazy morning to me. I'm like, I don't really want to. I want to go see my mom, right? We had technical difficulties all morning this morning, and so it's been kind of a crazy thing going on. And sometimes you just got to will yourself up and do things because you're supposed to do them. But if this is the obedience that you find yourself most often practicing, then your faith is on life support. And I want to tell you something. I would encourage you to pull the plug and find Jesus. Jesus did not die in order to chain you to obligation. Jesus died and rose again in order to set you free. In order to stir up affection for the Lord. In order to provide a force more powerful than the drive of sin. It's comparable to the force of a mother's love that wills her to action when her child has a gash open their leg up. And even though she normally faints at the sight of blood, she races over to him, clamps it down, and begins to make the decisions in order to save her child's life. Because all of a sudden the weakness isn't there. Because of the overriding power of the love that she has for her child. Love is what drives a mother's will to do the things she doesn't want to do in order to care for her family. And I'm telling you today that love is the driving force of God, for God is love. 1 John 4:8, anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. God works in us to will us and to work for His good pleasure. At points in my life, I've thought, man, I feel distant from God. Have you ever felt that way? I have. I don't feel like God's at work within me. I don't feel like God is in my midst right now. I don't know what is happening. Something is weird and I want it back, right? And what I've realized is that it's at those points that I've been straying from His purpose. And if that's you today, I'd encourage you to take some time this week to examine why you do what you do. Why do you do the things that you do? Why? That's the best question anyone can ever ask, I think. Examine everything. Why do you go to work? Why do you love your spouse? Why do you give money away to any certain organization? Why do you come to church as often or as little as you do? Why are you celebrating Mother's Day today? Examine everything and ask that question, what motivated that? Why did I do that? Why did I think that? And let me give you a quick example, because I don't preach every week because it's my job or because you expect me to preach. I preach every week because I believe that God is going to give me a message based upon His truth that you need to hear. And some of you have told me that you felt like I was in your home last week, right? You come up to me and you're like, did you talk to my husband? And I'm like, no, I hadn't talked to him this week at all. Are you sure? Did you talk to, so I'm like, no, I didn't say anything to anyone. I planned that sermon a month ago, right? And that's the way it works. I act out of obedience to the Lord, believing that through His Spirit, something supernatural is going to happen that will build His church through my working out of His working in. So my working out through His working in. So what about you? Where do you rely on Spirit power rather than your own willpower? Do you love and serve your spouse out of a desire to display God's love for them? God's love and His compassion? Your children, and those that know you, do you want to display God's majesty and His incredible unconditional love in that sense? Do you celebrate your mom in order in your life because of the day or because they're a gift and a blessing from God? That He's worthy of being praised because He blessed you with this person in your life. When your will is motivated by God's work in you through His truth and the love that is in that truth, it changes your world. It gives you purpose for every single day. It gives you eyes for compassion, and it gives you freedom. It gives you freedom and life.